It all started in 1999 when a group of shoe dealers in the popular Bakassi line, which is a main feature of the famous Ariaria main market in Aba, Abia State, decided to take laws or destinies into their own hands. Their mission was to put a stop into the incessant incident of armed robbery attacks, which had almost grounded commercial activities in the Eyimba city of Aba. The traders, mostly indigenes of Abriba, a town noted for its prowess and dexterity in the use of cutlass and machetes amongst other Igbo nations, went onto their shrines to gather enough spiritual and diabolical powers, backed by these and financial support from among top traders in Aba. The Bakassi boys went into action and they took the fight to the robbers' den and secret hideout. The result of the onslaught was an instant success, as Aba was totally cleansed of all sorts of crimes ranging from minor pickpocket activities to pilfering and the more horrendous organized robbery and kidnapping, which before now was the order of the day. After recording massive success in the city of Aba, this group would later spread to other cities like Onitsha, Owerri, Nnewi, but something terrible would later happen. The Bakassi boys were initially created in 1999 by traders in the Nigerian city of Aba who wanted to protect themselves from armed robbers and hoodlums. Having had such success in reducing crimes in Aba, the Bakassi boys became in high demand and their activities spread to other cities in Igbo land. Members of the Bakassi boys were primarily of Igbo ethnicity. They were generally young, able-bodied men in their 20s or 30s, although there were reportedly some members under the age of 18. Members were usually drawn from traders of various commercial markets. These commercial markets were divided into zones, from which 6 vigilantes were selected. New members received 2 months of training on the rules of the Bakassi boys prior to participating in the group's operation. Members of the Bakassi boys joined the organization voluntarily. Formal recruitment generally takes place at the age of 17, although many members were involved as an informant at around the age of 17. The Bakassi boys at first had about 500 members, but will later grow to approximately 3,500 members. Members of the Bakassi boys had magical powers and charms that made them invisible. They also used magic to determine the guilt of alleged criminals. The most infamous of their techniques involves a machete, imbued with powerful magic and charms. The machete was actually placed on the suspected criminal's body, and if it turns red, the person is actually guilty as accused. The Bakassi boys were known to mutilate, dismember, or decapitate and burn their victims. According to publications by various Nigerian media houses at the time, their greatest metaphysical powers was their ability to be immune to gunshot wounds. Even when shot multiple times at close ranges, they wouldn't flinch or sustain any injuries. These metaphysical powers was referred to as Odeshi amongst the Igbo people of Nigeria. Odeshi is an Igbo word that means it does not work, or it does not leak, or it would not leak, which meant if anyone shot them with a gun, it wouldn't pierce their skin, hence their blood would not leak. There were several reports of the Bakassi boys carrying out extrajudicial killings, arbitrary arrests, and torture of suspected criminals. They mostly killed their suspected criminals rather than turning them over to the police, hence making most of their killings extrajudicial and illegal. In August 2005, it was reported that the Bakassi boys allegedly rounded up 37 suspected criminals in the city of Aba, Abia State, and detained them in an illegal and poorly ventilated cell. 27 of the detainees reportedly died of suffocation. In November 2005, the Bakassi boys were suspected in the extrajudicial murder of 20 people in Aba. The victims were allegedly butchered to death by members of the vigilante group. At a point, the Bakassi boys were now used by the politicians to target perceived political opponents. They became responsible for numerous human rights abuses, many of them unreported, including many executions and unlawful detentions. Hundreds of people were killed by the Bakassi boys. Before those incidences mentioned, which happened in 2005, back in 2002, the Bakassi boys were allegedly disbanded following the federal government's move to prohibit vigilante groups. However, most Southeast state governments continued to covertly condone their existence, allowing the Bakassi boys to carry out their operations. In Imo, Abia, and Anambra, the state government went ahead to provide the Bakassi boys with salaries as well as offices, uniforms, and vehicles bearing the names of the vigilante groups. In January 2006, the governor of Abia State at the time passed into law a bill to legally recognize the operations of the Bakassi boys, despite the earlier federal government legislation prohibiting such vigilante groups. The relationship between the Bakassi boys and the Nigerian police force had been described as tense, given the conflict of interest and competition between the two groups. The Nigerian police had always been almost powerless in curbing the excesses of the Bakassi boys and even less effective in reasserting their authority over them. Nonetheless, there were reports in 2005 and 2006 of members of the Bakassi boys being arrested and tried for vigilante activities. In August 2005, the Nigerian police arrested and put on show 17 alleged members of the Bakassi boys for suspected vigilante involvement in the death of 27 persons in Abia State earlier in the month. Going further, in December 2005, 14 suspected members of the Bakassi boys were brought before the Federal High Court on charges of unlawful killings and illegal possession of firearms. The men allegedly killed a trader in Abia State in November 2005. In February 2006, 4 members of the Bakassi boys were also sentenced to death by hanging by the Umuahia High Court for the 1999 murder of 2 persons suspected of being armed robbers. The 2 victims, including a police officer, were dismembered and burnt. A panel of Supreme Court was actually created by the Nigerian federal government in 2005 to investigate the extrajudicial murder of 20 persons in Abia State by suspected members of the Bakassi boys. The Attorney General of the Federation, on behalf of the federal government of Nigeria at the time, disclosed that the federal government had banned all activities of vigilante groups and it was ready to deal with all ethnic militias and lawbreakers at the time engaging in multifarious human rights abuses in the country in the name of vigilante groups. But before the Bakassi boys, in the late 1980s and early 1990s, there was lawlessness and high crime in eastern Nigeria. This was mainly due to the existence of a small number of influential men who sponsored criminals. One of the most notorious of these men was Eddie Okeke, a pastor and the founder of local Christian cult. Okeke claimed the ability to heal many ills, make rich and give people power over things temporary and spiritually. He was also reputed to be a friend and advisor to most of the men in power at the federal level. Okeke and his followers were known for high living. They publicly beat up those that opposed them. This included government officials and policemen. Taking them to court was a pointless affair. They were invariably set free by fearful judges. Eddie's charms were supposed to protect users from even bullets. Ambitious men of all sorts, criminals, politicians in government and private sectors sought out Eddie and his charms. Even the military men who were state governors in the East at the time did not dare cross Eddie's path or they would find themselves out of power. This was how powerful Eddie Okeke was. As a result of all this, crime grew and lawlessness prevailed. Eddie's men marauded, stole and extorted from people. Among the working class, the most vulnerable were the traders and merchants whose fortunes were tied up to their trading goods. Their goods became the target of armed robbers. The police, of course, were unable to help. Psychologically, the fear of Okeke and his occult powers was very real. And when the Bakassi boys stepped in, they suffered setbacks against him in the first instance. To be more successful, they had to present themselves as having more powers than their opponents. Gradually, they began to succeed. Their success was sealed after they captured and publicly executed Eddie. After that, the communities in the East began to request the vigilantes' help in dealing with numerous criminals in their communities. This was how the Issakaba boys began to gain fame in southeast Nigeria. It was, however, believed that in the latter time, politicians began to use them for their own personal gains and the group was corrupted and fell apart. Armed robbers at the time began to copy their powers and gradually the group died off. This was the story of the rise and fall of the Bakassi boys in eastern Nigeria. Guys, kindly do well to drop your honest comment about this group if you had experienced them in the southeast during the time they were actually controlling the security architecture of the east. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and make sure you like, share and invite your friends so our videos can go viral. Thank you.